Big Brother's watching.
Yeah. And so I ran that whole quote, and then they blocked me for 90 days for running that the truth ends up becoming the enemy of the lie, and by extension, the enemy of the state. And they blocked me for 90 days for running it because it was a quote from Goebbels. And I said, this is the way totalitarians think.
It was a quote from who?
Goebbels, the Reich's propaganda minister.
Ever had to do an intervention? What about when Jesus' family came to do an intervention on him?
True commentary with Stu Epperson, author of the book First Words of Jesus.
You got a volume control right there on your headphones if you want it.
Okay, what?
And you can, that little button,
Mute.
it can mute your mic if you need to cough or something.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
But
No, this is, so I'm not on right now. Do I need to hit on?
no, you don't have to worry about that.
Okay.
This is just, that's your volume control. If you want to
Okay.
mute yourself, do it.
Luke 6:40, Jesus says, a disciple will become like his teacher. Is Jesus so real in your life? His power so working in your life? Has he so changed your life that people think you're crazy because you follow him?
True commentary with Stu Epperson, author of the book First Words of Jesus. Available now in bookstores or go online to firstwordsofjesus.com. Welcome to Truth Talk Live.
All right, let's talk.
A daily program powered by the Truth Network.
This is kind of a great thing, I'll tell you what.
Where pop culture, current events, and theology all come together.
Speak your mind.
And now, here's today's Truth Talk Live host.
Robbie Dillmore here for today's Truth Talk Live, powered by the Truth Network. And buckle up, I'm telling you, we got a wild ride today. I'm so excited. I really am about all that we are covering today. In the first half of the show, we have a very, very deep question that was brought by a listener in Richmond, and he's with us, and we're going to ask that question. In the second half of the show, we got a live report from SRN at the Iowa caucuses. And again, both are going to be helped out by my good friend and attorney, Adam Draper, who's also at the Pacific Justice Institute. And so a lot to talk about today. But first off, this question. And again, this is a live show, so it is our prayer. It is our hope that you would call in and help Eric out with his questions. A very deep question. I personally love the question. I've been thinking about it since I heard about it this morning. I'm so honored to have you on, Eric. And so I'll let you ask your question so that the listeners can kind of begin to ponder this with you.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Dillmore. I very much appreciate being on the radio. I'm very honored. It's the first time I've ever done anything like this. So just hopefully, bear with me if I stumble at all. But this is my question. If humans cannot fully understand the mind and motivation of God, is it therefore possible that inconsistency in the Bible is part of God's perfect plan to bring people together in the study of the Word?
Wow. And you took a little different angle on it for me.
Well, I was trying to polish it up in the last hour, so just thinking of essentially how I would basically encapsulate my current question. I'm just trying to figure out if people say that the mind of God is different than the mind of humans, and we cannot understand what God understands, then it's quite possible that God's interpretation of perfection may actually be different than humans' idea of the concept of perfection. So my original inquiry was, is there anything in the Bible that explicitly states that contradiction is not allowed? It's always been an oft-quoted statement by leaders in the religious community that a perfect document would not have inconsistencies. But that presupposes the human definition of perfection. And so that's really where my question is at this point.
Yeah, I absolutely love it, Eric. And, one of the things is we talked about it earlier today that, that one of the questions that this arose from was the idea of the Levitical covenant that were said that you would be, receiving this covenant is that you'll have the offerings as Levites for an eternal covenant, right? And how is that still in effect that since there are no longer offerings at the temple, that they're still getting offerings and those kind of things, and that idea within that. So with that in mind, you just heard what Eric had to say, and Eric is trying to, like we all are, in my opinion, trying to get closer to God and understanding Him more. And I love the new angle that he put on it, like some of these questions, like the genealogy of Jesus between Matthew and Luke. How do you exactly reconcile that? Well, I don't know how many good Bible studies I've been to on that very subject that really did do exactly what Eric said. It drew people closer together. But my good friend Adam Draper's here, also an attorney and also a philosophy kind of guy. And so, Adam, tell us your thoughts as you hear Eric's question.
Oh, but it's Eric, thanks for the question. It's near and dear to my heart, and I think it absolutely does draw us into contemplation as to what God was really like. I would sort of flesh that out a little bit, if you don't mind, because this is how I started thinking about this issue. So the Bible does say that there is no change in God, in him in whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. And yet, as I think you alluded to earlier, Moses changed God's mind, and Mary changed Jesus's mind, and so the question is, well, if there isn't any change in God, how did you change His mind? Without getting into the weeds too quickly and trying to give you a very straightforward answer, it would be, yeah, I think you're right. I think that we do misunderstand the nature of God, or at least we don't have an understanding of His totality. And what I would direct you to is there is a rabbinical notion of tzimtzum, and what that is that, well, so God is light, and He is infinite, and He is omnipotent, and He's omniscient. On the other hand, He doesn't experience change, but He did create us, in whom His relationship with us sort of requires change. So how do you look at that? The idea is that He made creation as a sort of a pocket within eternity, and then He withdrew the totality of His perspective of His perfection from that, but He left within it a certain indicia of His presence, and that within this pocket there is all kinds of possibility of change, and that the question itself then gets turned into, so if you don't look at this, if you look at this in a completely Western thought, you end up with it, well, can God make a rock? If He's omnipotent, can He make a rock that's so big that He can't pick it up? You end up in word games. So I really love this, and I'm looking forward to talking to you about it some more.
Unfortunately, that music means we've got to go to a break, Eric. We're going to be back with more, but we would love your thoughts, and that's why this show is live. We need your calls, 866-348-7884, 866-34-TRUTH.
Here are the contest rules for the Truth Network. Prizes won or not transferred.
I was trying to keep that simple. I'm afraid it got a little too wordy.
What now?
I was trying to keep that simple, but it got a little wordy.
Yeah, you can't.
Within 30 days of winning.
Tzimtzum is a difficult concept.
It is, but it really speaks to what he had already asked. He'd already put many of those words that you just into the same context. So you two are tracking I'm pretty sure he's with you. But at some point in time, you got to hit him with the hey, yud hey, hey. You know, that's.
I'm going to do that more. I didn't think I wanted to do that first. I wanted to.
Yeah, but I think it's got to come out of the chute. And then let's get that on the table. And I'd love to see what he says versus hopefully.
Our attachment to
No, I'm glad to do
is
that.
our commitment to the future. We have to stop looking back and start looking forward. The Truth Network encourages you to prepare.
But it's funny, he said
and move on
in our
with the
conversation
love
right
of
before
Jesus Christ.
You want to bring the mic closer
Some
to you?
kids never smile.
Yeah, that one is just stiff as a board.
Oh, there we go.
Got it?
Like the other
I'm
kids.
gonna bring
But he literally said, so God can make a rock bigger than he himself can lift. And there was something about a square. There's another one of those philosophical things about, you know, can he make a square that's also a circle or something?
Right. Because yes, he can.
Yeah. And that was
because
his,
it's the Heisenberg principle.
Right.
Right.
and so it's fascinating to me that you guys went exactly the same. So he's tracking with you, but the piece of information he does not have,
Well, I could. I mean, we
And-
just
and-
need sort of.
and- clearly,
Some kids think they'll never smile
now
again.
the challenge
But
is we're gonna
donating
recover. That's good.
orthodontic services may help them smile.
Yeah, I mean that we do absolutely need to get that
The
kid.
application
I share.
eligibility
I mean,
requirements.
it's the key.
Visit AAO.
Here's a Renewing Your Mind Minute with Dr. R.C. Sproul.
So
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
Yeah.
Saved a wretch like me. We sing that in church with great.
So you don't say Yud Hey Vav Hey?
Very little belief.
it's Echye Asher
We really
Echye.
believe
Okay.
that we
That's not the Yud Hey Vav Hey. You're actually talking about where he told
by the grace
Moses, "I am who I am."
do we
Yes.
really believe
Because
the
that really
favors
means I will be
we
what I am
receive
becoming.
from God are unmerited, unearned, and
Right. So that's in Exodus.
3:14.
How could God, who is a good God, allow me, a sinner, to continue to enjoy all these benefits? That's the question.
For today's special offer, visit renewingyourmind.org.
I read this observation about young people starting out in business. If at first
Hey,
you
yeah,
succeed,
I am.
it's probably your father's
That
business.
is sure.
The family business might be safe, but it
I am.
also might lack
Hey,
one
yeah.
of the advantages of starting
However,
out like most young people do, and that is the
he puts an
opportunity to
aleph
fail and try again.
in front of the hey.
Pastor Erwin Lutzer
And the
once
second
wrote a
I
book
am.
with a great message just
I would
in
put it in front of
He
the first one
called it
too.
Failure, the back door to success. The Bible, as well as life, is filled with examples of people God used even after they failed. That's often where we find life's best lessons. And this is David.
And how did you say it?
Encouraging
Well,
you to get on the
so
road.
how the Orthodox Jewish
Discover how
version
God
says
uses failure on Route 66.
is they would pronounce it Echye Asher Echye.
Right.
Okay. And then he said, "Thus thou shalt say unto the children of Israel, Echye," translated I am. But that it really does not mean I am who I am. It could mean I am who I will be.
Right. I am come to pass.
Right. But literally, if you break it down, the literal meaning is translated, I will be what I am becoming. Okay. And then if you look on the
Let your love be sacrificial. Let it be focused on others. Generously invest your time and resources in
English to
those who have
Hebrew,
no resources of their own. This is John
Lexicon?
MacArthur.
where they do it on you. They take each word and they write it out. It's the I can't remember what it's called, but it's
Welcome back to Truth Talk Live. Today we are really having a lot of fun. I hope you are. We're talking with Eric in Richmond, and he's got this fascinating question about God's perfection and you know, the essential contradictions that lead to, interestingly, a close relationship between us that are studying him, and those kind of things. And so I have Buskman in Ohio wants to weigh in on the whole idea. Buskman, my favorite jokester from Ohio, who talked about not seeing that well. Isn't that you?
That is me, Mr. Fillmore, and thank you so much for that package. That was so awesome. I got it the other day, and I was just blessed. I mean, it was just so cool. It's a really thick joke book, and I plan to go through all of them. And you know what I'm going to store, brother, in my
Okay, so I knew that. Yeah, I've got the T-shirt. I'm going to wear it someday when you call, so you can see it on Facebook or something.
That'd be awesome. So I was very intrigued by that question that our friend has called in, and I would first, before I would like to address it there, Mr. Billmore, is he looking for something that compares we Christians to the holiness of God, or is there something else? So if the question could be asked again, I would like to address it, because I think I'm going to go in one direction, but it might be another direction based on that.
All right. Well, Eric, you had a chance to hear what Adam said, and you heard what Buskman said. If you wouldn't mind, rephrase it for Buskman.
All right. So basically, is it possible that inconsistency is allowable under God's idea of perfection? That's the idea in a nutshell. That's what I'm basically trying to hash out. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's all right.
Okay. So my question would be to find where our common ground is. Are you speaking from a biblical standpoint, Adam, or is it just a world view? Please God, I'm a simple man or a simple woman trying to understand the things of God. So is it starting from the human perspective, or are we starting from the biblical perspective, brother?
And his name's Eric. Adam is my guest. It's in the studio. Yeah, that's all right. That's all right. Go ahead, Eric.
I was asking the question as I was trying to understand what it was that God required of us. So it was more, it wasn't the logic in general that I was then applying to the Bible. It was my study of the Bible and trying to understand it, which initially prompted the question, which does take root, of course, in the more general abstractions of logic.
Okay. So for Christians, at least for me, Adam, or Eric, I'm sorry, Eric, I start straight from Scripture. Probably like you, I had questions about who is this God. I hear talked about there are several religions among humanity. Which one is right? And at some point in my walk on human existence, I kind of delved into a few of them and weighed logically, probably like you, sir, what seems the most logical, what seems the most fitting. And honestly, Eric, when I started reading the Bible for itself on its own merits, and it was early in my walk with God, and I used the King James Version because my grandfather was a big fan of the King James Version. So I was like, okay, I'm going to start with what Grandpa. And it's kind of a strange book to start with, but the very first book, Eric, I read from cover to cover, which is within the 66 books. There's actually 66 books in our Holy Bible. One's the book of Ecclesiastes. And
Wow.
I don't know if you've ever read that book. It's 12 chapters long, but it's very depressing. I thought, as a human, this is very depressing, Buskman. And because it's just, when you read through it and you see what Solomon wrote, as a person living on planet Earth, I was like, there's got to be more to God than this, this depression. Well, I moved on, Eric, to the New Testament. I said, okay, who is Jesus? I hear a lot about this Jesus person. And a fellow Christian at the time, who was a pastor, a local pastor, a Baptist pastor, he said, Busman, read the book of John. And as just a person that just wanted to read the literature and let it talk for itself, I read through the book of John. And when I finished what John had wrote in 20 chapters, I realized, wow, there are 3 other accounts of this man. And guess what, Eric? I ran into exactly what you're talking about. Inconsistencies. But it was honestly, my friend, it was in the logic. It was into, I started thinking, well, how could a, like one of the stories that's dealt with in the Gospels is a demon. Well, one Gospel writer said it this way is the way it happened. But then the other Gospel writer, Eric, said it was this way that happened. And I, like you, started thinking, okay, there's inconsistency. So if the Bible's supposedly written by God, he's obviously an inconsistent God, because this account is different, not consistent, with this account. So I started coming up with those same questions. After I started delving into like historical and other foundational truths that you do not get from just reading those pages straight out in a Bible, in my King James Bible, I saw where the inconsistencies were actually not inconsistencies, but they were actually different true accounts. And I started realizing, okay, John didn't record this part, for instance, but Matthew did. So when I started looking at that, I started realizing there really isn't any inconsistencies here. Just one writer wrote some information and the other writer wrote more information. And it took me a while, Eric, to put away the unction of my human sinful self to say, well, obviously God's not consistent. I can't trust him. Let me move on to another religion. And then what happened, and this was very supernatural, the Spirit of God revealed. I mean, the author of the book, Eric, entered me, and I was able to understand when I would go and talk to a pastor or a teacher who obviously had more knowledge of this book than I did, and he was verifying.
Busman, I'm afraid that music means we got to go to a break, and we got a whole bunch of other stuff. But I loved your story, and there's a lot of input right there. When we come back, we're going to hear more from Eric, more from Adam. And I appreciate your call so much today, Busman. Keep up the great work. We'll be right back.
Truth Talk Live. Mama, what does the chicken say?
Yeah.
Chicken. Oh, okay.
So I know Stu has his expectations, and Joey Hudson has his expectations, but
What about the tiny dog?
listeners are left with that, which is a mess.
Well, it is.
And so,
What does the turkey
I do think that the getting to the Exodus 3:14 is kind of the point, right?
So,
but there's all kinds of weird things like that, like what you and I have talked about before, which is Moses said, God, show me your glory. And he says, you can't see my face. What? You can't, yeah, but I want to see your glory. You can't see my face. I'm going to hide you in the rock, and I'm going to pass by you, and you see where I've been.
What does the chicken say?
That's tricky.
yeah.
You know, and of course it must lead us to the one thing I think we're constantly driven
What
to.
about the tiny dog?
How about you don't know everything? How about you really do not possibly understand, and the moment that you think you do, Jesus shows up and says, yeah, you turned all this into zeros and ones, and it doesn't function that way because you're carnally minded.
Right. Which is exactly where I think Eric is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that's helpful to probably just come out of the break and say, you know, Eric, we got to unfortunately go to Iowa here in a minute. But before we do that, I really want you to have this discussion with Adam. And, you know, give it a few minutes for listeners to hear this, because I think it was really helpful for me, and I think it'd be helpful for you.
Okay. Awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Truth Network.
I'm lazy. You're listening to Plugged In.
I mean, Busman, what he said
Dan doesn't want to go to Europe. He'd rather stay in California.
is exactly right for a certain person.
But in the graphic novel, A First Time for Everything, Dan discovers that really.
Well, neither one of them are wrong. I mean, and I'm not saying I'm exactly right. What you and I are just saying is,
First Time for Everything is about the author's own adventures.
I like what Eric said,
and how
which is
discovered new countries, new friends, and new sides of himself.
Sort of like this.
Entertaining and in some ways inspiring
An
journey.
Eastern way of looking at a Western view of omnipotence. Because you are not considering something. Why does God allow evil?
But a first time for
Okay.
everything reminds
If he's omnipotent, he doesn't have to allow
can help
evil.
you grow.
So why does he do that?
Speaking of growing, Plugged In
And
has an
what they say
ever-growing list
is
of book reviews. Why not take your own trip to our
that
website?
his willingness to
pluggedin.com/.
suffer the existence of
I'm Paul
evil
Lacey for Focus on
is
Families, Plugged In.
and a use of his omnipotence to be able to do it. So inherent right in that is an inconsistency in our ability to get our brains around it.
Yeah, exactly where he wants us.
Exactly. Because it's a spirit thing. And you have to understand it spiritually, just like he said to Nicodemus, that which is born of the spirit is spirit. That which is flesh is flesh.
Yeah, he's got us right there.
Yeah.
You think you got this?
He's saying that you are unique because
The
I
good
made
news
you
is
in my own
we are
image,
who
and
we
as
are
a
becoming.
believer, I am redeemed you through the blood of my Son, the Lord Jesus
Because
Christ.
the more I realize of Ahad,
Want to live a victorious life?
that
Listen to Dr.
that idea of oneness,
Or visit
Mhm.
LTW.org/Jesus to start.
Hear, O Israel, and Jesus said it's the most important commandment. Like, what? Welcome back to Truth Talk Live today. I don't know about you, but I've loved this discussion with Eric, who's calling in from Richmond with his question about God's perfection, allowing for contradiction that perhaps, you know, draws us closer to him and closer to each other, however that may work. But I didn't want to just leave you right there, Eric. I know we got to go to Iowa here in a minute. We got Joey calling in with some update from there, but I really wanted Adam and you to further your part of the conversation just for a few minutes to help settle this a little bit more. Not settle it because it can't be settled.
Yeah.
but perhaps to give more insight for both us and the listeners. But go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, Eric, one of the things I wanted to make sure that I said to you was thank you so much for the question, because from my perspective, you're not wrong. Okay, I'm not saying that. So I'm just gonna offer this. In Exodus, Shimon, 3:14. It's the case where Moshe is talking to Yahweh. It's at the burning bush, and he goes, "Yeah, you're going to send me down here into Egypt. Who am I supposed to tell them sent me?" And I'm going to go ahead and read that verse in the Orthodox Jewish version, and it says that, and Elohim said unto Moshe, "Echeche asher echeche, I am who I am," is the translation in English. And he said, "Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, Echeche hath sent me unto you." Now, the interesting thing is, so we translate that into English poorly as I am who I am, or I am that I am, where literally, if you go and break it down, literally what he said was, I will be what I am becoming, said, tell them I will become. What? Well, how is if God can't change, how is he becoming anything he's not already? And the answer is, yeah, duh. It's right there, right in the middle of that. I mean, there's the issue. So it is, yes, a matter of perspective. And I don't mean Holy Heisenberg principle Batman. What I'm saying is right there in the middle of that is this, okay, there are two things going on here. One, there's me in my totality. And then there's me in the middle of my experience with you, which is why I created you, man. Right in the middle of that relationship with us, that's what I want. And in the middle of that relationship, I'm not limited. See, I limit myself in the middle of this to become what I am becoming, but I'm not becoming anything I'm not already. You and I are becoming something together, and I'm allowing it. Now, what does that do to our perspective on contradiction? It throws contradiction into a whole new light. And to me, I don't want to just belabor this and just throw this at you, but this is the entire perspective of why it's to be carnally minded is to be in enmity with God. It's a spiritual thing. And so from the perspective of Yeshua, there's a story where Nicodemus comes and he says, what do I have to do to be saved? And Jesus says, you have to be born again. And he's like, what I have to re-enter my mother's womb? And Jesus said, no, you're a doctor of the law. You don't understand this. You won't understand this if you don't understand. You can't understand any of it if you can't understand this. That which is of spirit is spirit. That which is of flesh is flesh. And when we're looking at this, of course, we have to come at it at that perspective. And the perspective is, well, we don't know the totality of God. He is unfolding himself to us in the middle of this relationship. And then I'm becoming in him something that isn't already. Come on, that's awesome. And it ends with, there's the book of John, 1 John 3:2. It says, when we see him, we become like him because we see him as he really is. Well, it means now we're not seeing him as he really is. So I love your question. I didn't come remotely close to doing it justice. And I'd love to continue to have this conversation with you. But it seems to me that the beginning of trying to give a response to you that might be helpful would be there.
Well, I appreciate it. I very much do. And I think the key to everything is to understand context, scope, and how you define your term.
Mm-hmm.
And
spoken like a good lawyer.
I was trained by the best, so.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer too, so I get you.
Technically, I haven't paid my bar dues last year, so but as soon as I pay my late fees, I'll be back in good standing. But that being said, essentially, my overall conclusion to your point about how can an unchanging God change, the way I would reconcile that is it's not that God has changed, but as an example, let's say you had a toll booth, and the toll booth has a specific unchangeable algorithm. And if you put a penny in, it'll take the penny and it'll come back out because it doesn't accept pennies. But if you put a quarter in, it accepts it. So the toll booth never changed. God never changed, but the interaction with God changed.
Yeah.
And as a result, based on God's overall algorithm, it's a different result depending on a different input. So and I know I have to wrap this up very quickly in the interest of time, but I was thinking about the faith of the Canaanite woman. And Jesus said, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, to which he replied, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. To which Jesus answered, your faith is great, let it be done for you as your desire. I'm thinking, God did not change. The only thing that changed was the presentation of faith to an unchangeable algorithm. So the woman changed. And when God's mind has been changed in the past, it has been presenting different information for God's unchangeable algorithm to interpret and then reply to.
I love that. That's awesome.
I'm in total agreement with you. I love the way you think. I think, he's got that's a beautiful way to express what you've been telling me for years, actually.
Yeah.
It really, really is. And I love the deep discipleship that's in that. And so I applaud you, my friend. And yes, we are going to have some more conversations, Eric. I promise you. We'll get it together soon. Thank you so much for participating with us, for sending the question to the Truth Network to begin with. We're honored and honored to have you on, my friend.
Well, thank you so much for taking my question and speaking with me about it. And yeah, anytime in the future, if you'd like to speak about it further, I would be happy and honored to. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. God bless you, my friend. Have a great week.
Thanks, Eric.
How fun was that? Like, wow. So we got Joey Hudson is in Iowa, and it's cold up there. Joey, what's up, man?
Yes, it is cold. That's an understatement. A guy from South Carolina, I'm not accustomed to minus 14-degree weather, and that's what we have experienced here for the past few days, particularly at night. But I got to tell you, it did not distract from some of the folks showing up last night at the caucus meetings. The turnout was a little lower than normal, but still, there was an enthusiastic crowd at the caucus that I attended, which was just outside of Des Moines, and they had combined 3 different precincts. So it was a pretty large crowd of about 500 people who gathered there, and the weather did not seem to affect them at all.
And so, from your perspective, a faith perspective, Joey, and Joey is sort of a legend in that Greenville, South Carolina area. We're so honored that you would be on with us today. But from a faith voter's perspective there in Iowa, how are you feeling based on what you saw?
Well, in Iowans, there's been a lot of discussion over the last couple of months leading up to last night's caucus meetings. Faith is an important part in Iowa. Most people, I don't know the exact number, but most people in Iowa identify with a particular religion. And the pastors up here do not hesitate to talk about politics from the pulpit. There's both President Donald Trump, Governor Ron DeSantis, Governor Nikki Haley. All of them were really recruiting pastors to be part of their team. And between the 3 of the candidates who came into top positions last night, they had literally hundreds and hundreds of pastors around the state of Iowa who had signed up to be part of their team. So let's kind of look at the overall results from last night. Donald Trump won as expected. I don't think there was any question as to whether or not he would win. I think the question was, well, how, by what margin? A lot of the polls were showing that he would break 50%, which, by the way, is a record. No presidential candidate has ever won, has even come close to breaking that 50% mark. He got 51% last night in the finals. So Governor Ron DeSantis and my former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley were battling for second place.
Joey, I hate to jump in here, but that music means we got to go to a break. So maybe you got a question for Joey, or you want to call in with your comment, 866-348-7884. We'll be right back.
Every conflict in a marriage is
So how long you've been doing this 4
You
o'clock
don't
show?
resolve that conflict, then you have.
I started a week after Christmas, so it was a 26th, 7th.
Gosh.
This is Real Family Life.
Why now?
With
Gosh.
Dan Wilson.
That's a lot. Gosh, that's a lot.
You created this wall between
lot.
you, and you become so resentful because you've been stuffing things
Wow.
down instead of dealing with the conflict.
But
you can't even talk to
it's a really different kind of show that I've ever done.
You haven't realized, man, we have been not resolving
on a lot of different
days
levels.
and months and years, and now we're
But
separated.
it's really Stu's show to some extent. I get that, but
Great marriage.
he just can't do it very
Tear
often.
down that wall.
And so what is this? What is the show? Truth Talk Live?
Got a conflict.
Well, it's the Truth Network is who we are.
Mhm.
And so the idea is really for our listeners to get a chance to get out what they want to talk about, which
Oh, okay.
Eric, perfect example at the beginning of the show is, obviously this is what he wanted to talk about. And it's a great topic.
I mean, I think it's great, and I think it's wonderful. I love what he said. I think it's really good insight.
Yeah, the toll booth thing was brilliant.
Sounds good, honey. Check today at NHTSA.
And then he went on and illustrated it with a Canaanite woman, which again, you got a perfect example, in my opinion, again, of what appears to be Jesus changing his mind.
Right. But it's
he's got.
Here's Dr. Robert
it's not. I mean, it's constantly like, well, what activates this? Faith.
What kind of steps are you
Right?
talking about? Well, first of all,
Well, it's like the woman who touched the hem of his garment.
Right.
Exact same activation key. Right? It was what she believed.
Or Moses. You know, God says, I'm tired of them. I'm wiping them out. You can't do that. If you do that, all these people that you're trying to get to see you and how you are going to go, look what he does to his own people. Why would I follow that? Right? And you don't know. It was God. He knows my nature. That's Kiddush Hashem. Right? No. I know your nature. Don't you? That it's certainly possible. There's a whole other way of looking at that, which is that's what I wanted. I wouldn't have asked that question if I knew I wasn't going to get that from you.
Pathway Minute is produced by
Right?
Pathway to
Or I'm kind of throwing something out there as an offering to you, which is what I was saying to you when it came to
In a world that wants to pull you down, you found the station that helps keep your mind on things above. The Truth Network.
Does that mean
One of the most traumatic things you can experience is a broken relationship.
Does that
Between you and a child.
does that mean really you can't see my face, for on that day you will die? You've already made it clear that you are capable of saying one thing and meaning another. Adam and Eve were surely going to die the day they sinned, and they did die spiritually. They didn't die physically. So is this the opposite of that? You were offering something to Moses? I don't know
But I
that.
think there's also, it's like just like faith is an activator, oneness is an activator. In other words, when they got all on the same page in the upper room, it activated, right?
Yeah, that's Akdus, right? Yeah.
Right. And that idea of becoming one with and somehow or another getting a sense of his goodness rather than our, like you said, we have no concept of his goodness.
Right.
Gary, I've been told that physical
But if you in a group all of a sudden become aware, then that has an activator in and of itself. I don't know exactly how it works, but clearly when you see it in the book of Acts, every time that they come together and like boom, like man, big things happen.
Right. And so then that can be turned on its head and turned into what I experience a lot, Robbie, and wouldn't say this in public. But you end up
You are
being
saying it in public, so be careful.
you end up being this sort of this name it, claim it stuff,
Right.
right? Where that tries to turn into some kind of witchcraft. Where you can see that it's there, but it's not quite that, is it? Okay, because it's by grace are you saved through faith, right? So the grace is already there. You're activating something that already is, but it's not on your terms, it's on his.
Oh, welcome back to Truth Talk Live, and we're having so much fun today. Wow, what a great question we had from Eric in the first part of the show. Now we've got Joey Hudson live in the Iowa caucuses, and we still have my friend Adam Draper of the Pacific Justice Institute. And Adam, you have a big stake in all this, right? As the Pacific Justice Institute is clearly, going to take part in the whatever happens either way, right?
Yeah, we are the largest legal entity that only defends religious liberties in America. And the Brad Dacus started this thing, and it's just gone crazy. But obviously, yes, we're looking at what's going on in Iowa. And I would just say, why would all of these ministers be interested in that, except that I'm just going to go ahead and say it. We're experiencing persecution and a real attempt to keep ministers in particular from being able to speak the gospel and the truth in the public square. You know, we're fighting this out in the courts. We ended up with it over and over again in the Supreme Court. So how is it that we find ourselves with a favorable Supreme Court that's actually defending our liberties at this point, but that Donald Trump appointed two pretty good justices who are helping defend our liberties now? And I say helping because it's by far, you know, not done yet. And obviously this is extremely important to all of us who are out here defending religious liberties.
Right, because we all saw what happened, you know, with Roe versus Wade, and that was a result of justices being appointed, you know, and all those. So your votes back then all counted for something. They're still counting for stuff, right, Joey?
Absolutely. And I want to add to that, our religious liberties are under siege, and I think you're exactly right as far as why these ministers feel like they have to be involved. You know, whether you like Donald Trump or not, as a person of faith, you have to appreciate the fact that he appointed federal judges who will defend our God-given right to assemble, to worship God. And were it not for those federal judges that he was able to appoint and get confirmed, it's pretty scary where we may be today.
Here's, you know, the question I have. I imagine it's a lot.
Joe Biden and the Democrats are they're feverishly trying to appoint as many judges as they can. And you know the type of judges that they will appoint. So the reason this election is so important this year is so that we can get the right people, because we have some wonderful organizations out there who are working with churches and pastors to defend their right to preach the gospel. You mentioned Roe v. Wade. I mean, that's a landmark case there, protecting life. But if we allow the liberals and the left to take over the courts again, they're going to do it, and we're going to get back to a place that we don't want to be.
Right. So important that we vote. But here's my question to both of you. Adam first. So my big question, you know, and again, I'm not an expert in all this stuff at all, but how in the world, because all you hear from the media, and I never watch the news myself, but my wife has it on from time to time. There's no way. I mean, he's going to be convicted of 14 different felonies before the election. How can he get through all that and still be elected president, Adam?
Oh, well, that's a softball all over the place.
I would like a softball because, I mean, if anybody else is like me, you're just out there, you're hearing all this stuff. He's a criminal. Well, how does he get elected president if he gets convicted of all this stuff?
The Constitution doesn't say anything about, other than that, you have to be a particular age. Okay, you hadn't been born in America in order to be president. And those are the things that are listed for you to be president. So is it possible for the people to vote a convicted felon to be president? Yes.
Really?
I think they probably assumed that people wouldn't do it. Okay. And then you can be removed from office by Congress because you have engaged in acts of high crimes and misdemeanors. Okay. But barring veto, okay, then you don't get removed, which is why it's interesting. All these other conversations we're having about immunity of the president, what he was doing while he was president, stuff like that. It's a fascinating issue, but yes, he could be elected and then he could pardon himself.
Well, I'm so glad I threw you a softball at him. So, how about you, Joey? I'm glad to hear that because I've never heard anybody go on the air and say, well, hey, I didn't know you could be president and still be a convicted felon. Did you know that, Joey?
Well, actually, I did. But I want to add something to that, though. In Iowa last night, Donald Trump won 55% of people who identify as evangelical Christians. And he has consistently had the support of the faith community. The closest one, of course, Governor DeSantis had 24%, Governor Haley 13%. The interesting thing, though, particularly with Nikki Haley, is that people who, and she campaigns on the fact that she is pro-life, but she had a large number of people who identify as people who believe that an abortion can occur at any time, who came out and supported her, which is a bit of a mystery of how that could,
Man, that is a mystery. Whoa. Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, the other question I know is on I don't know if it's on everybody's heart, but I imagine there's a lot of listeners that are like me, like, man, how do we know we're going to have integrity in this particular election? Like, how do I know that it isn't rigged? Are you feeling anything up there in Iowa, Joey?
Well, Iowans do it right as far as their caucuses, because they all came together. As I mentioned, the caucus I went to had 3 precincts. So when they listened to candidates, and then they divided up into 3 groups in the building, and they literally had paper ballots. So you were handed a paper ballot. You wrote who you wanted to vote for, and then you dropped it in a box. Now, that's not how they do their general elections. But my response to that is this. I hope and I pray that since all the troubles that we had a couple of years ago, that the state legislatures, and I know in South Carolina we certainly have taken a hard look at what went wrong. There was a lot of gray areas as we went into the election, and they used COVID as an excuse to do things that they knew was wrong, but it wasn't in black and white in the statute. So they did them anyway. And I would hope that the state legislatures, and I know a lot of them have passed election integrity laws that are going to protect us from things like that happening again.
So, Adam, is that a softball as well? I want you to be able to hit it off the bar.
Well, I'm actually going to answer this one. I'm a member of the Forsyth County Board of Elections, so I'm going to be careful about what I say.
Okay.
But what I would say in the state of North Carolina is, if you wanted to commit fraud, if someone were to hire me and to ask me, I've got a bunch of money, how would I commit fraud? How we register in the state of North Carolina is a very interesting prospect. And I'll just say this because I can say this as a matter of fact. There is a man who registered to vote and using my address this past August. Okay. So I went to our local board director and I said, well, this guy, how do we get him off the list? We were supposed to have list maintenance. You wait around 2 years, and if he hasn't voted in 2 years, then you can challenge that and have him removed from the list. Okay, it's got to be better than that. Or I could challenge him once he's voted, but not before, and that has to do with a decision that was made in federal court recently. Really? So without belaboring this, if the way that we do early voting, okay, in the way that we do write-in ballots, if you happen to know a bunch of people who have registered, who are, and you happen to know that they're not going to vote, you can vote for them. Okay, and is there a way of knowing who hasn't been voting? Well, yes, there is. Okay, do we have all this? Is it available online? Well, yes, there is. If you have a bunch of people that are available to you, that you can go say, I'm going to go register at the time and I'm going to vote, and this can't be contradicted. Do you have a pretty good chance of success on that? I would say theoretically that there is, but I do need to say this. In Forsyth County, we're not seeing that. I haven't seen it. And I would also add this. I hope that what would happen is if we did something like that, that we would see some circumstances where people came in and tried to vote because they made a mistake about who wasn't going to vote. And they said, hey, somebody voted for me. And we're not seeing that either. And I've had this conversation over and over and over again with every member of the board and the board itself directly going, we need to make sure that this is safe. I do think that there is an issue, and I do think that we need to get to the bottom of it. And I'm not even going into the crazy amount of data that's come in Arizona, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, and in Georgia about fraud, about the misuse of ballots, particularly mail-in ballots, particularly ballots where they just arrested a lady for dumping ballots in Connecticut.
Well, so just unfortunately, we got just a couple of minutes. I want to jump in and say a couple things. I know both of you would heartily agree there's never a more important time to vote than this. In spite of all that shenanigans, right?
That's right.
Your votes really can overcome any amount of fraud that goes on. It just really,
if you vote somebody else not voting for you.
Right. And then pray.
Absolutely. Yes, prayer.
Prayer is the strongest thing you have at your disposal, right? And then obviously your vote. Well, thank you both so much. Joey, great to have you on again. Adam, you're my buddy. I love it. And thank you for listening. Oh, you guys make all the difference.
I hope that wasn't too much information, but I want people to
know. To me, I mean, my questions may sound really stupid to somebody, but I had no clue. And I'm going to guarantee you, my wife doesn't have a clue. I'm going to guarantee you there's a lot of people out there that do not know you can be president of the United States and be a convicted felon. That's actually I love to hear that. Like, really? Like, that is, I'm glad that I asked that question, because it's burning down in there. Like, man, how can he be running and everybody's so excited about Trump for president when he's got 57 felony things coming at him for all different things? Mm-hmm. But then clearly the other thing I know is on everybody's mind is the fraud thing. I just know it is. And so if you can't talk about it, then we got big trouble. Great job, man. I don't know what's going on with the computer is just not playing the stuff, is it?
Oh no, I'm gonna talk to Carmen about that. Because there's some commercials where it's just like 30 seconds just missing out of nowhere. I'll talk to Carmen about that.
I gotta stop the stream. We can go off the record. No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally ignorant, but I'm glad I'm totally ignorant.